What American soldiers did to SS guards when they found Dachau. April 29, 1945. A chilling Sunday morning in southern Germany. The skies hung low and heavy with grey clouds, and a biting wind swept across the Bavarian landscape. Elements of the U.S. 7th Army's 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, a unit drawn from National Guard troops primarily from Oklahoma, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, were advancing toward what intelligence reports described as a potential munitions storage facility or industrial site on the outskirts of Munich. These men, hardened by nearly 2 years of combat since landing in Sicily in 1943, had slogged through the mud of Anzio, liberated Rome, fought through the Vosges Mountains in France, and crossed the Rhine into Germany. They expected resistance, perhaps a skirmish with Wehrmacht holdouts. What they encountered instead would shatter their understanding of human depravity and ignite a fury that blurred the lines between soldier and avenger. As the lead companies of the 157th Infantry Regiment approached the complex, they spotted a railroad siding branching off the main line. Parked there was a freight train, 39 boxcars, the kind used for transporting livestock, now eerily still under the overcast sky. The air grew thick with a putrid stench, a mix of decay and human waste that clawed at their throats. Curious and cautious, the soldiers moved closer. Lieutenant William Walsh, platoon leader in Company I, was among the first to peer inside one of the open cars. What he saw made him recoil in horror. "My God," he muttered, before shouting for his men. Piled inside were corpses, hundreds upon hundreds, emaciated figures twisted in agony, their skin stretched taut over skeletal frames. Men, women, even children, clad in striped prison uniforms or rags, stacked like cordwood. Estimates later put the number at around 2,310 bodies, though some accounts suggest it could have been as high as 3,000. This was the infamous death train which had originated from Buchenwald concentration camp near Weimar on April 7, 1945. Over 3 weeks, it had meandered through Nazi-held territory, its 4,500 to 5,000 prisoners, mostly Jewish evacuees from subcamps, enduring unimaginable torment. Guards had abandoned the train days earlier, leaving the survivors to starve, freeze, or succumb to typhus and dysentery. Some bodies bore signs of cannibalism, desperate bites taken in the final throes of survival. The journey, meant to prevent liberation by advancing allies, had turned the cars into rolling tombs. The Thunderbirds were no strangers to death. They had endured the carnage of Monte Cassino, where artillery shredded their ranks, and the brutal house-to-house fighting in Nuremberg just weeks before. But this was different. This wasn't battlefield carnage, it was systematic annihilation. Private Edward "Babe" Heffraun, a young paratrooper attached to the unit, though more famously associated with Easy Company later, described a similar shock in his memoirs, though his experience was with other camps, the sheer scale of industrial murder. Here at Dachau, a 19-year-old rifleman from rural Oklahoma collapsed to his knees in the snow-dusted ground, tears streaming down his face. Another GI, a seasoned sergeant from Arizona with Native American heritage, vomited uncontrollably. Whispers turned to shouts, "What the hell is this? Nazis did this." The initial wave of sorrow crashed into a tsunami of rage. Fingers tightened on M1 Garands and Thompson submachine guns. Eyes fixed on the distant watchtowers, adorned with the black SS lightning bolts. In that instant, the veneer of military discipline cracked. The rules of engagement, the Geneva Conventions of 1929, which mandated the humane treatment of prisoners, faded into irrelevance. All that remained was a primal demand for retribution. This is the untold chapter of the Dachau liberation, a day when American liberators, confronted with the abyss of Nazi evil, unleashed a storm of vengeance. It's a story of how ordinary men, farmers, mechanics, college kids, transformed into instruments of raw justice. But it's also a tale laced with moral ambiguity, one that challenges the narrative of unblemished heroism. Dachau wasn't just any camp, it was the prototype, the first Nazi concentration camp, established on March 22, 1933, by Heinrich Himmler in an abandoned munitions factory. Over 12 years, more than 206,000 prisoners from over 30 countries passed through its gates, including political dissidents, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, Romani people, Soviet POWs, and tens of thousands of Jews. Official records cite 41,500 deaths, but the true toll, including subcamps and death marches, likely exceeded 50,000. Inmates endured forced labor for arms manufacturers like BMW and Messerschmitt, medical experiments, such as high-altitude simulations that killed hundreds in pressure chambers or malaria infections without treatment, and a regime of terror enforced by Karpos, prisoner overseers who often rivaled the SS in brutality. By April 1945, as the Third Reich crumbled, Dachau had swollen to over 67,000 inmates in the main camp and its 123 subcamps, far beyond its 6,000-person capacity. Typhus raged unchecked, claiming 15,000 lives in the winter alone. Commandant Martin Gottfried Weiss had fled on April 28, leaving the 23-year-old SS Untersturmführer Heinrich Skodzensky, often misidentified as Heinrich Wicker in early reports. Wicker was actually involved with a subcamp surrender, in nominal charge. Skodzensky, a fresh-faced officer with little experience, had about 560 SS personnel under him, many of them recent transfers from the crumbling Eastern Front, elderly Volkssturm militiamen or wounded veterans pressed into guard duty. Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks, a 27-year-old Colordon commanding the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry, was at the forefront. Sparks, who had risen from private to battalion commander through sheer grit, radioed his superiors, "We've got a situation here." He urged his men forward, barking, "Eyes front! Keep advancing!" But ignoring the horror was impossible. As they breached the outer perimeter, the full nightmare unfolded. The camp's 30 barracks, designed for 250 each, housed up to 1,600 skeletal inmates apiece. Piles of bodies lay unburied near the crematoria, where ovens still smoldered with human remains. A gas chamber, disguised as a shower room, stood unused for mass killings but had been tested on small groups. In the hospital block, pseudoscientific experiments had left survivors with frozen limbs or septic wounds from seawater injections. The SS guards, sensing the end, had mixed reactions. Some fled, others barricaded themselves. Skodzensky, dressed in a crisp uniform, emerged with a white flag, accompanied by a Swiss Red Cross representative, Victor Mauer, who had arrived days earlier to negotiate a peaceful handover. "I hereby surrender this camp to the United States Army," he declared in halting English, expecting chivalric treatment as a defeated officer. Sparks' executive officer, Major Avery, stared at the well-fed Nazi, then glanced at the emaciated prisoners clawing at the fences. He spat on the ground. "You bastards," he growled. The formalities dissolved into bedlam. As the gates swung open, 32,000 survivors, Poles, Russians, French, Yugoslavs, and more, surged forward in a delirious wave. "Amerikansky! Amerikansky!" they cried, their voices hoarse from months of silence. Some collapsed from the effort, their bodies too frail to sustain the joy. But amid the jubilation, the Thunderbirds hunted. In the coal yard, near the camp's southern wall, a group of about 122 SS men, including hospital staff in white coats, attempted surrender. They raised hands, chanting, "Kameraden! Hitler kaputt! Comrades, Hitler is finished!" Lieutenant Jack Busherhead, a Cherokee from Oklahoma whose ancestors had endured the Trail of Tears, oversaw the scene. He had just toured the crematoria, inhaling the acrid scent of charred bone. His face twisted in disgust. Without a word, he motioned with his Thompson, lined them up against the wall. The Germans, confused, complied, about 50 in the first group. Panic set in. "Name?" "Geneva Convention," one pleaded. Private William Bird-Eye Cuttin, crack shot from New Mexico, mounted his .30 caliber Browning machine gun on a tripod. The metallic clack echoed. Busherhead nodded. The gun roared to life, a 10-second barrage that shredded the line. Bodies slumped, twitching in the coal-blackened snow now streaked crimson. 17 survived initially, only to be finished off by rifle fire. Sparks heard the chatter and sprinted over, pistol drawn. He fired skyward, crack. "Cease fire! What in God's name are you doing?" The gunners paused, eyes glazed. One wept openly. "Colonel, after what we saw on that train, they had it coming." Sparks, torn between duty and empathy, restored order, but the reprisals spread like wildfire. At Watchtower B, overlooking the Worm Canal moat, 4 SS guards descended the ladder, arms raised. GIs from Company K didn't hesitate. Bursts from bars and rifles knocked them into the water. Soldiers then lined the edge, pumping rounds into the floating forms for good measure. Elsewhere, a lone SS man was cornered in a boxcar. He was dragged out and bayoneted. The inmates joined the fray. Despite their weakness, adrenaline-fueled vengeance. In one barracks, prisoners cornered a capo, a Polish criminal who had beaten them for favors. They drowned him in a latrine pit, holding his head under until the bubbles stopped. Near a watchtower, another guard was pulled down and pummeled with shovels, rocks, and fists. American troops watched impassively, some lighting lucky strikes. "Let 'em have it," a sergeant muttered when an officer suggested intervening. For nearly an hour, Dachau devolved into a zone of unchecked reckoning, the oppressed becoming executioners, with liberators as silent witnesses. Order returned as reinforcements from the 42nd Rainbow Division arrived, claiming co-liberation honors, a point of historical debate. The 45th insists they were first. Sparks secured the surviving 358 Germans in a stockade, partly to protect them from his own enraged troops. But the killings, conservatively 40 SS dead, though some estimates reach 520 including wounded who died later, couldn't be hidden. Signal Corps photographers captured the scenes, GIs posing over riddled bodies, the cold yard slaughter. Days later, an investigation launched under Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whittaker. His May 1945 report, Investigation of Alleged Mistreatment of German Guards at Dachau, detailed violations of the laws of war, recommending courts-martial for Sparks, Bushyhead, and others. It ascended the chain to General George S. Patton, the flamboyant commander of the Third Army, known for his iron discipline and disdain for weakness. Patton, who had toured Buchenwald earlier and called the Nazis the lowest form of human life, reviewed the dossier. Accounts vary, some say he burned it dramatically, others claim he filed it away with orders to classify it top secret. "This is bullshit," he reportedly snarled to Whittaker. "You expect my boys to play by the book after seeing that hellhole? Nervous trigger fingers, that's war." Patton consulted Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower, who concurred, prosecuting heroes for slaying monsters would crater morale and public support. The inquiry was quashed. No trials ensued. Bushyhead returned to Oklahoma, becoming a teacher and never discussing Dachau. He died in 1977. Sparks rose to brigadier general, later reflecting, "I don't regret it. It was justice in the moment." The reprisals fuel debate today. Neo-Nazis twist them for equivalence, historians contextualize them as visceral responses to genocide, not policy. Dachau's memorial now honors the victims, with plaques for the 45th Division. No marker exists for the executed SS, their remains in anonymous plots. The aftermath was grim. 2,000 survivors died post-liberation from disease, despite army medics' efforts with DDT delousing and 4 nutrition. The Nuremberg trials later convicted Weiss and 35 others, 28 hanged. Yet the core question lingers, confronted with the death train's horrors, the experiments, the ovens, the living dead, would you have stayed your hand? Or pulled the trigger? War's fog obscures easy answers. For the Thunderbirds, that April day etched an indelible scar. They freed the damned but carried the weight of vengeance home. If this echoes in your mind, explore the Ghost Army's deceptions that bamboozled Hitler, link in the description. Thanks for watching.